Israel is essentially doing the work that the Western world should be doing.
Deadly retribution is raining down on Gaza. Israel says it's targeting Hamas,
which is resolving terrorism in the Middle East. There is no other way. There's no other way. We've tried everything, giving them money, opening the borders, having conversations, singing for peace, teaching about peace. Listen, I'm a Jew. I live in the States, right? But I'm very aware that the Holocaust was just around the corner. And another Holocaust is happening right now.
See, I used to get punched in the face, but now I do the punching. My family hated because most of them died in the ovens. Hamas is not the wave. You know what I'm saying?
2 years old. The things that's been going on lately, you just have to separate it from the Israeli-Palestinian situation. It's a different story. I personally know 4 people that have been taken out of their homes.
And they killed, and they kidnapped, and they tortured.
I'm not trying to justify anything with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but this is way above this. This is terror. My thoughts about Hamas is that it's an equal to ISIS.
They're interested in getting rid of Israel and all the Jews around the world. And that's in their constitution.
I don't feel it supports the Palestinians. If he would care, he would never launch this attack.
Rockets were fired into Israel as gunmen infiltrated several border towns and bases.
They swarmed into Israel by land, sea, and even on paragliders. And then they went on a rampage, slaughtering civilians in the street.
It's a horrible situation, yeah. And it was the worst day in Jewish history in terms of deaths since the Holocaust. 1,300 people died.
So we're here to give each other support that we need right now, because when you're sitting alone in your house and seeing these things, you just want to fall apart. And so that's why we're here today, to bring each other up and to lean on our community.
And I have friends that were...
All right, let me just go ahead and introduce you guys again if this is your first time tuning in today, because we went like 3 different times, but they keep on trying to censor us. I'm here with Juju. This is your boy, Big Baby, as always. Make sure you subscribe. Sit and Politic podcast. We're going to get into these videos here. We're going to finish watching that one, and we're going to watch one from a Palestinian, pro-Palestinian protest as well. But we wanted to make sure to be able to put this content out today. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you show some love. When you see this stuff and things like that so far, when you're hearing from the Israeli perspective, what comes to mind for you?
Well, it's very sad. I mean, it is very sad. It's tragic. It is traumatizing, but and it's hard because I empathize with them. I mean, I lived through 9/11. I was an adult during 9/11. So I remember how terrible, how afraid you are after something like that happens.
Sure.
So, yeah, it is a terror attack when you just kind of fly in or go various ways in, and you purposely target civilians. There's a problem. But I think there's another side to it, like always, so. Well, I empathize with them, and I think they'll be traumatized for a very long time, if not the rest of their life, over this. Socially, each side needs to have a little more compassion for the other, or nothing is going to be resolved.
Sure.
So there you go. I mean, that's how I feel. I feel for the people of Israel. I really do, but I think their leadership has really failed them. And, at some point you got to start to look in the mirror, and see what's what has caused this. And I know that doesn't take away the pain, but, but that's just the truth. You've always got to have your guard up,
Maybe it could assist in some kind of like, if you're going to come back to the table and have conversations surrounding like peace and how to move forward. I think you have to have some kind of understanding as far as like, why the person that you're sitting across the table from at this point did whatever they did. In this case, like you said, targeting of civilians and stuff like that. Really tough to.
Both sides need that. Anytime, because I've had lots of conversations with you. Like I believe it's important to say you're sorry about things.
Yeah.
It just in daily life, if you do something wrong or you say something wrong to somebody, if you know that you affected somebody, you got to try to put yourself in their shoes, try to understand what you did, and determine, so it's about just trying to
determining
assess the whole situation
yeah.
and acknowledge parts of it for the other person and for yourself. And we're not perfect. We gotta forgive ourselves, but also we need to ask forgiveness from others when we do something wrong. And they're not willing to do that. And that's the problem here. It's
do you see a situation, I mean, from either side, the leadership that's currently in place, do you see a path to which there's some kind of like agreeable resolution that could be found with the people that are in power, still in power?
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm not for, we'll get to the Palestinian side, but I am not for us as far as the United States is concerned. While I feel for these folks.
Sure.
That is terrifying, but they have impeded on Palestinian territory for the 75 years. And, it's not actually that complicated, I don't think. The more I learn about it, the less complicated it gets. You have one side that has more power, and they are imposing their power on the native folks there. Now, native, I guess, you'd have to go through history to determine what that is. But I'm just saying they were there first, and they were there in larger numbers. I'm not talking about 2,000 years ago. I'm talking about in recent living history, the Palestinians are there.
At what point do you make the determination that, hey, this is the cutoff point, this is the point that matters?
No, and I think things change.
Because if you say that from 70 years ago or whatever, like, okay, at that point it was this. I don't want to hear about 2,000 years ago. I mean, to be honest, my perspective on this is that was 70 years ago. Let's deal with what it is today.
Yeah.
So the same kind of premise, really. I don't want to hear about 2,000 years ago. 70 years definitely isn't as, long as 2,000 years ago, but still, it's not what we're dealing with today. And the sins of yesterday.
No, I think you're right.
The sins of 70 years ago, are things that it's fair to acknowledge and fair to have like these kind of like conversations about, but it doesn't do any good to just hold on to that main point. And that's going to be your main sticking point going forward. I mean, finding something that is like a two-state solution, which, I think, I agree with you that with the people that they have in place today, I don't know that you get to that point. Cause I think, these kind of acts, and I agree with you that Israel is in the power position, done against them. Now you've made the person with the leverage essentially no longer interested to come to the table, because now also you've given them other options of how to handle this. Now it gets even more insidious, and I want to get back to the video because I don't want to get too derailed. But I mean, when you start to think about other countries' motivations to this and why they may support Hamas and may want to financially support them to kind of conduct some kind of proxy war, which in both cases, both people, Israel and Palestine, or Hamas in this case, which unfortunately we do have to discuss it as Palestine because that is the governing body of Gaza. So they got to go. Now I think
that's right. I think that's right. And I think that we could. Well, I get in a long discussion about that. I mean, I'm learning more though. I've always thought that the two-state solution was right, but then, but I think I have some ignorance on that subject. It's like there's, but I've started to listen to this one-state solution, folks. Some of them believe in that.
Yeah.
So it's like I don't know. I know that I would need to think about it and learn more about it to determine which way. But regardless, there's a long-standing back and forth. Both sides have had tremendous suffering, although Israel has inflicted most of it. Okay, so until they have some leadership that can acknowledge that,
I want to point something
terrorism.
I want to point something out that I think is important when we're talking about in the two-state solution. I guess alleviates this a little bit, but there are Arabs, at least, that are able to live in Israel and that do so. And something I was watching earlier was saying that something like 89% of those Arab Israelis would not prefer to live in Gaza, according to polling and things like that. So I think that there are things to acknowledge with Gaza. And I don't know that, I mean, maybe like something, this is where it gets really sticky, because then you start to, be the world police. But it's like, I don't know if those people need to have some kind of like because this would be democracy, and maybe not every democracy maybe is the best for everywhere. But it's like, you would like, at this point, you want to separate the people of Gaza from Hamas. That's obviously what we all want to do outside of Israel. At least we want to separate them. But the unfortunate fact is that that's their representing body. So how do you separate the two in this kind of like modern landscape? Like when we're talking about like war
they've
crimes,
been doing it. The United States, they've been doing it. They can do it. They can do it if they want to.
Okay,
right now they're just being vicious. It is about revenge.
How do you separate the two when we're talking about like a urban warfare situation? The point that I was making was, when we're talking about these things like war crimes and stuff like that, like we don't meet, like it's not realistic because we don't meet in the middle of fields anymore to have wars. You know what I'm saying? We don't meet in the middle of nowhere and say this is the battlefield so we don't hurt any civilians. Like, unfortunately, I think on both sides you're going to have these kind of casualties, which I don't think is acceptable. I think at this point there needs to be some kind of conversation, because Israel's already defended itself. I think the conversation of does Israel have a right to defend itself, I think we're past that. They already have defended themselves.
Right.
They've already inflicted a disproportionate amount of pain and suffering. And if we're only starting this conversation from October 7th, which you've already alluded to and is true, the whole story involves time way before October 7th. October 7th is informed by a bunch of things that happened leading up to October 7th, essentially. But at the end of the day, I think that is for sure a terrorist attack on civilians. So I think that's where, you draw the line. And I don't know. Like, it seems like, and this is probably not realistic either, but it seems like we should be at a point where, like, if a leadership of a country basically outright wages war against another, like that, like I said, this is a hot war at this point, consistently, day after day, people are dying. I almost feel like there should be something in place where then, though, like there's a emergency election almost in place at that point. Like, for example, say when we went to the Middle East after 9/11 and we were attacking Afghanistan, even though may or may not had anything to do with what we were coming there over. In that case, in order
it didn't, by the way.
Well, that's my point.
Well, you just brought up Afghanistan.
That's my point, though, is that we went to Afghanistan. If at that point there was some kind of mechanism where, there was kind of like an emergency election or something like that at that point, where the people had to actually back what their leadership was doing. Like, I wonder how that would look now, for example, because when we were trying to separate the two, I wonder if at this point they had an election, would the people vote Hamas? Would they want Hamas to be the rep, or are they truly counter to what is being done by their leadership? And then in that case, how do you kind of rectify that? I don't know. But that's actually something I was kind of thinking about earlier, and I thought was just kind of interesting, because how often people get put in power based off things that have nothing to do with war, have nothing to do with those kind of decisions, and then they're in power throughout wartime. And then in some countries, literally, that suspends election, like Ukraine right now, for example. There are no elections because they're in an active war. So it's like, I wonder, I mean, do these Ukrainian people, do they still want to be fighting the war? Actually, I don't know. I wonder.
Right. I mean, I don't know that any, I just think, that's the war machine is out of control.
Exactly.
I think. Yeah. And so all of this, you have to look at all of this within that context, within it. It has its tentacles in everything, everywhere, all over the world. And I mean, who knows how much money is spent? It's so unbelievable. And the whole thing disgusts me. And I feel sad for the people who have suffered there.
Yeah.
I think I'm looking at it as an American citizen. And you think, we have Israelis here. I think we have, or Jews. We have plenty of Jews in America, and I think most
second highest population of
Jews. I mean,
it might be first. I don't know.
It might be. Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
They got to learn to live with each other.
Yeah.
And so I think there's some other influence here, and it probably has
Well,
to
but
do with this military, the immense wealth, basically, that these forces have on this. I mean, it's like there's something there other than what the people
one
want.
thing I want to push back on, and I would love for you to give me some good pushback on it, is in Israel, these people do live together. I'm not saying like peacefully necessarily, because there's a blockade. They're not allowing people that are in Gaza to travel freely or in all that. I understand that aspect of it, but the people who are Arab Israeli citizens, one thing I wanted to look up, is there any Arab representation in their government? There is. I was curious about that. I honestly didn't know leading up to this. So there is. That can't be said about Gaza. There's not even any Jewish people that live in Gaza at all.
I mean, we've just got to get past, in the United States, it's very diverse, right? In most cities, especially, right? I mean, you go through a city, you're going to see all different types of people from all different areas of the world. And it's fine. It's part of the city. It's just like they're people, so I don't understand. There is an influence on this, is what I'm saying. I think there's a proxy war type element going on here.
Oh yeah, great.
So with Iran, though, maybe we need to have, diplomacy with Iran so that we can come to an agreement, and they can influence the Palestinian, Hamas.
A lot of discussion around this, though, is the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia, and that being an issue. Is that there's a relationship there, so therefore to kind of create some kind of
that's what I'm saying, is you have all these external forces coming in there.
Oh, for sure.
It is important to listen to stories like these folks, because what they suffered matters too. Although, look, you've got to have an awareness as an Israeli citizen that this is going on.
This is the most
like they were just kind of living life like, yay, literally, let's go party right outside of Gaza.
Here, just real quick.
Woohoo.
I want to kind of like hone in on the point that you're making there a little bit. This is actually, in my opinion, the literal most important thing as far as like getting out there and hearing these people's story, whether you agree with them or not. And the reason being is because then hopefully good ideas win out in this, and you give a voice. Think of it like collective bargaining when we've talked about unions and stuff on here before, and me and you have talked about it. It's like, if this person's plight, if they just suffer this and they never get to communicate it outwardly to masses, then you don't have the kind of like public pressure that can happen. Like if he just, says whatever happened to him and his family and they talk about it, like their political influence is very small, as most individuals and most individuals' family, their political influence is small. But if this ends up activating me, you, whoever, millions of people will see this at some point. I think that that is really the main power through like free press, freedom of speech, that we have kind of discourse around what you're talking about, around the proxy war stuff, that it's like we don't even know why we're in the war, because it's like it's not clear, and we're people that fund the wars and send their kids to die as cannon fodder. We're not even given the respect to be given the real reason that they have. So it's like, not only do we not have the real reason, but we're just completely left in the dark, clueless. But then if we do end up stumbling upon that, the only way that we can actually have any real political power as individuals is together, for us to kind of organize in this way and create some kind of like I don't know,
it is an old-fashioned kind of, though, but I mean, but I understand if I were in their shoes, an Israeli person's shoes. Well, first of all, this would cause you to, I hope it makes the populace stop and say, okay, so how did this happen, really? Eventually it will, but the initial sting of the pain is just horrible, but I feel for them for that, because it's like,
well, you're consider the Israeli experience. So we've only been listening to this for a little bit, and 2 minutes, and we've gotten a little bit of this already. So I did want to touch on this, so I want to just bring it, present it. This is a people that they're uniquely paranoid, maybe rightfully so, based off of their history and like history of being killed and moved around and so on and so forth. So it's like, I think something happens like this, it immediately gets equated to the Holocaust and things like that. And another thing to consider, I think there's 15 million Jews in the entire world. So it's like there's a little bit of that, like almost extinction paranoia, you know? So I understand like how when they're the only Jewish state in the world, you know what I mean? Only Jewish state in the world gets attacked, and there's conversations, and the response in the early days of this was like kind of the conversation that me and you had offline, where it's like, hey, does this place even have a right to exist, so on and so forth. I think that rightfully gives people some insecurity. Associated with a lot of things, family, livelihood, so on and so forth. Like, what does that even mean? If somebody were to ask, does the United States have the right to exist, and we were as vulnerable as it feels Israel is right now, I can't imagine how I would respond. It would be very scary for the long-term stability of my family, my children, so on and so forth. So I definitely get it. That's why I think we have to get around the leaders who consistently in modern times and honestly throughout times, I'm sure, appeal to their own self-interest. I'm sure that, like we were saying with Iran, the leaders in Iran, they don't give two shits about what's happening here and these people's individual struggle. They don't care. If it's a means to an end. But either way, do you have anything else to add that we can hop back?
No, I'm willing to watch him and see what happens.
See what I say.
We're kidnapped in a party, a rave that was made for peace, a peace festival. It was the most difficult week I've ever had in my life. I cried many times, and I'm traumatized because it felt like we're not safe in our own our hometown.
What do you think they expected Israel to do after this kind of attack?
Let's say if Mexico, God forbid, would attack America
and slice up everyone in Texas and New Mexico, what do you think America would do?
America would not leave one stone unturned until they get all the terrorists.
So once again,
I think the analogy was bad there. Terrible. It was ridiculous.
Killed everybody in Texas. How many people is that? It's
That's like millions of people. Millions of people.
They're making a complete false equivalency. False equivalency,
anyway.
which I think is based in the emotional nature of what happened, obviously. But that's where, like you said, we have to have some awareness and some grace for the other side, not for Hamas, and not even necessarily for the leadership in Israel, but the people that are actually impacted by this. So either way, but that was wild if they killed everybody in Texas.
I mean, I'm like, okay, that's a false equivalence. Come on now.
Yeah.
I mean, but if they killed everybody in Texas, I mean, that would be so catastrophic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's insane.
It would be so unbelievably catastrophic that it's like you'd have to even reassess. You'd have to reassess so much.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't know that, like, I don't know, at least speaking from my own
ridiculous.
Yeah, speaking from my own standpoint, I don't know if that would then make me feel as if it's like, okay, well, wage war on civilians. Part of this is if you feel as if you're going to be a modern person that has their sights set on the future, just endlessly killing eye for an eye style, and not even eye for an eye. You take an eye and
over
an eye.
I mean, it's like all the limbs and everything. I mean, geez.
Eye for an eye, and then your entire family and everybody in your lineage. But I don't know. I still don't think that I would be pro that. I think we really, anytime that these kind of things are happening, we should be trying to find an exit, at some point, an off ramp, not a 100-year blood war that's just not ending. That's not.
I was thinking about that too. I'm like, oh my God. I mean, that area is so. There's just been so much death and misery. I mean, over. In recorded history, and all of recorded history in that region.
I think that's
so vicious.
That's another.
If you think on our territory, it's been pretty vicious too.
It has been vicious, but I think the day in, day out paranoia isn't the same. So I think so I agree with you. I think that's one thing when we're having these conversations, I have to acknowledge that I'm like having a conversation from something that's informed from my experience. That some of these people and I don't want to make people sound like savages, but they just don't have the same experience, and that informs different kind of sensibilities, and maybe they have a different value on human life. Like for me, I have the privilege to have the feeling that there's no reason human life should ever be spilt intentionally. You know, people die every day based off of just our own biological clock. So it's like,
you know what I find always so fascinating, because I was telling you, I've done a lot of history reading and stuff, right? Yeah. But I always find it so fascinating that you kind of get numb to it, even watching this. And I mean, I feel bad for all these folks, but it's almost like death is just, when it's collective, you have no real sense of that. That was my son, or that was my cousin or daughter or whatever.
I think you don't have an emotional anchor. So then when you're processing, because I don't think it loses its, I don't think it necessarily loses it, because I think still with something like this, it really connects. Like when you're seeing, when I was seeing this stuff on Twitter and you're seeing like just the most heinous things you can even see.
Oh my gosh. I mute those because I cannot deal with it.
But then again, so I was having a podcast recently, and Matthew Perry died, rest in peace. Yeah. And we were discussing that, and how we were discussing it and I talked to you on the phone a little bit about it, but it made me consider kind of like how we're like, because he's a celebrity who died, there's almost like this dehumanization that happens when you're kind of discussing them passing away, especially if they're not somebody that, you had some kind of like fondness for or whatever. So it's like, you could joke about it or something like that. You don't feel as weird, but if somebody like joked about your grandma who died yesterday, you'd be outraged. You know what I mean? So it is weird how we get disconnected.
Yeah.
This, I do agree that still we're desensitized, because there's almost like, basically for a human being, when you see stuff like what's happening there, if you're not having a reaction to completely break down emotionally, then you're almost like underselling it, because it's that devastating. So it's like we are dehumanized in that way, where it's like when we take it in as information rather than what it really is, which is something that basically should never happen, and humans should never have to experience secondhand, let alone firsthand.
Right.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, but I do agree with you that it is easier to kind of like view this, but that's why when we're hearing them talk about it, they're like, well, what if they killed everybody in Texas? Well, yeah, they're pissed. You kind of have to understand they're pissed.
That would be rough.
Analogies might not be on point, but let's go ahead and get back into it.
They're expecting the outcome. They're expecting the attack back that Israel is doing at the moment.
Israel has formally declared war after that unprecedented terror attack from Hamas.
That the death toll in Gaza has surpassed 3,700.
Do you have family in Palestine?
Yes, I do.
How are they doing?
We lost 14 relatives in the bombardment, and currently I haven't heard from relatives in about 12 hours.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
The thing about Gaza, which your audience should know, is about half the population is under the age of 18. So any Israeli incursion into Gaza is going to be killing a lot of children.
Palestinians digging through the rubble to rescue these children trapped in their beds after an Israeli strike.
And Israel has had a history of doing that?
Israel has had a history of doing it, but what has happened in the past is probably going to be done in spades now.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the goal that Israel has now is to destroy Hamas. And they also, of course, are trying to free the hostages that Hamas took last week. And it's going to be impossible for them to do that without civilian casualties.
I see that babies in Gaza die. I'm sad about that. But I cannot, if it's their babies or our babies, it's not about choosing. It's just getting rid of Hamas so their babies can live in peace too.
I don't want to keep pausing because I don't want to make this too long, but I was expecting you to say something about that. Because I mean, it seems like that's a person that is rationalizing, genocide. Like,
well, no, he is, but he didn't see. Obviously, he doesn't see it like that. Well,
he even said it's not about choosing. He said it's not about choosing, and then immediately spoke about choosing. He said it's not about choosing, and then he's like, "But then I'm going to choose. If it's ours or theirs."
Well, but I think it's only complicated in that. Well, it's not really complicated. I mean, look, the motives of his government, of the Israeli government, are. He didn't mention anything about the motives. He didn't mention anything about all the policies that created this terrible place where, look, they were willing to, we got to look back at what caused the election of these things. I can't hear you. Oh, you are on mute.
No,
Okay.
good.
But yeah, I mean, you know what I mean? It's like we don't want to look back, and he's not looking back at what his government is doing. He's talking about equivalent babies. We got to still get Hamas. So he's just like, well, Hamas, everything's Hamas. Well, Hamas is a violent political regime. They're terroristic. They're willing to do what they did, but something caused that. What would you do if you were in the same position? You put yourself in Palestinians' position.
It's the attacking of civilians. Obviously, I think that's where we, cross the line. I think we've already touched on this. I think we agree on it for the most part.
Yeah.
That it's the outright attack on civilians intentionally.
It's awful.
Yeah, and like you said, they are terroristic, and I've already touched on this earlier. But a lot of times we make the confusion of just referring to them as a terrorist group, but it is deeper than that. That is the problem, is that this is
they're a political group. I mean, they run things. Yeah.
That's my point. So it's like, it is more complicated than that. This is literally the representation for Palestine. So how do you come to the table with that? You do have to eliminate their influence somehow, at least political influence. I don't know how. And, I don't know. Yeah, that's tough, because that's why I think, like, on some level, and in my society, when a country decides to make a decision like this, there should be more of a checks and balances within the population who has to bear the brunt of it. The reality is the civilians now are bearing the brunt of the retaliation that is coming from the actions of their political leaders and the decisions they made. I wouldn't be okay with that in any way. If Canada, to use the guy's example, if Mexico did that, I don't know if Mexico killed everybody. If the Mexican military killed everybody in Texas, I don't know if I'm then like, we should kill every Mexican. I don't get to that point. I maybe want some people to pay. I maybe want the Mexican government to pay, whatever that means.
You figure out why this happened. You figure out why it happened, how it happened. Well, they're figuring out how it happened. But then you got to figure out why it happened. And then you got to and you go step by step like you do with any problem-solving process. But look, they may have, Hamas is the representative right now. I mean, they are. And I think Qatar gives them a lot of humanitarian aid. But it's like, they've got to, look, both governments have to deal with each other. And then outside countries that have influence, like our country has a huge influence, we are supposed to be a democratic republic. And so our representatives should hopefully look at what public opinion is. That's their job as representatives. And so, we've got to just say, hey, chill out, because it looks like, so you hear the Jews here, and God bless them, because look, the Holocaust was horrible. I've learned a lot about it, and I've read a lot about it, and it is horrific and terrible. But what I'm saying is that you can't numb yourself to another population experiencing the same thing, because numbers wise, they're really working on trying to, get rid of all Palestinians out of that land is what they're doing. They're pushing them into nothingness, and that is genocide.
Well, I mean, the thing is also, you have the West Bank situation, which whether you consider this to be related or not, but that's disputed territory still, which is occupied by the military. So that is 100%. When we're talking about the worst of this, I think honestly, a lot of times that is happening in the West Bank currently, because Gaza is insulated to a certain extent, where they have this now. There's a lot of limitations that they have placed on them currently from Israel, but it is a Palestinian state, so or whatever you call it. I guess maybe state is not the correct word. Let's go ahead and get back into the video.
We are Jews. We couldn't be prouder. And if you can't hear us, we'll shout a little louder.
According to the protesters, their primary demand.
Did James Brown invent the "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud"? Because nobody's done it better than that. So I want to know whoever created that one, and then everybody's tried to do it. We're Jews. We couldn't be prouder. And if you don't hear us, we're going to say it louder. That sounds like Miss Rachel. She needs to stop. They need to turn that off. Yeah, not good enough. You can't come behind James Brown with that garbage.
And was the return of the 205 hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza, many of whom are babies. Naturally, I wanted to see if I could get in touch with one of these hostages. But to be honest, that felt damn near impossible. Then, later that day, I got a call from Kosha Dills.
Too much of this world being negative.
The Israeli freestyle rapper I met at the Free Palestine rally.
Hamas. I'll turn him into hummus.
He told me he had a friend named...
By the way,
Really?
if you go to these events,
Turn him into hummus. What?
you're guaranteed.
I mean, that's
to find
actually kind of vicious. You know what I mean?
You're turn them into bean paste. Jesus Christ, dial it back.
Right.
But no, I think that if you go to these protests, you are 100% always guaranteed to find a person willing to rap there every single time.
Alana Zajcik, who had 6 family members kidnapped by Hamas militants. They were snatched from their homes and driven across the border back into Gaza. He asked if I wanted to talk to her, and I agreed. So we set up an interview for the next morning.
Andrew, could you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm gonna switch over to Alana. We're getting all the bagels out of the way.
For sure.
There was an echo on your end, or
There's an echo on my end.
Yeah. You're recording me this way too? Yeah, that's what I say. It's a 360 almost. I guess it's like a 180.
Exactly, 360 or 180, depending on how you look at it.
Hi, Andrew.
Hey, can you start by just telling us your name and sort of what's going on?
My name is Alana Zajcik. What's going on is that my 6 family members have been taken hostage to Gaza. My mom is one of 5. Her eldest sister, Aliki, has 3 kids, Danielle, Moran, and Sharon. Sharon and her husband...
You need to calm down. You're starting to sound like Alex Jones. You're really.
But I mean,
oh,
you know what I mean? I mean,
No,
I'm not saying
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure these people, I don't know. But look, to me, the story she's telling me does not match.
Oh, come on. Oh,
Look at her. I know that sounds crazy.
Jesus.
I know
That
it
sounds-
does, but you know what? I'm just saying.
I mean, I'm not.
How would you be?
I'm not
How
gonna
would
say-
you be if that many members of your family were kidnapped by a terrorist group?
What family
You know,
members?
would you be like? I mean,
Okay, well, can I choose the 5? If they allowed me to give them a list of 5 family members, I'm sure I can give you a list I would feel completely fine about. I'd be able to do this interview and many more.
maybe that's it.
Um,
I don't know.
I think that yeah, I hear your point. If it was if my family members were
I mean, she's got her hair did and her
But-
makeup on, and she's all put together. You know, she's more put together than I am. I didn't work today, but I don't have missing. Knock on wood. I don't have missing family members. You know, but it's like,
yeah, knock on wood.
you know what I mean? I mean, it's crazy because you think if you listen, do you think that's crazy?
Yeah, well, no, yeah, I would say so. I would say so. Hey, look, I think it's crazy, yeah, but I think that it's okay to point that out. I just wouldn't.
So was the other guy.
It would take a
she was
lot.
The second one.
It would
that
take a
other
lot.
guy was a little bit calm too, explaining how he had a whole bunch of family members that were. What did he say? I don't even remember what he said. But the guy right before her, he was saying that he
Rapper.
had. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, was it the rapper that had, or he was just talking about turning
I don't
it
know,
into
but I don't know, but this is the thing to be conscious of is that, if they're not grieving the way that we expect 24 hours a day, I don't know, maybe she was able to pull together for this interview.
Okay.
This is a popular YouTube channel, so you know what I mean? She maybe was able to, have the thought that a lot of people are going to see her on this video. Let me just put my face together. Also, maybe she thought that this is important and that it'll help. I don't know. I agree with you. Look, it'd be tough for me to cut the cameras on if my family was missing and just, do a quick.
Well, I'm not insinuating that she's lying or, any of that.
That seemed like
I'm
that
not
seemed like
insinuating that
that's
'cause
like
I don't have
exactly
enough
what you were
evidence for that.
insinuating.
Well,
Well, that's
no,
exactly what you were
but
saying.
I'm just saying it's weird. So we should pay attention to that. That's all I'm saying.
We should watch her. Yeah, I'm with you. I think that I think, hey, you're thinking critically all the time. I got to tell you, I turned that off a little bit, and I'm thinking emotionally. I'm listening to her, but you kept a critical eye on her, and it's not all making sense. Let's get back into it. Let's see what else she says.
We live on kibbutz Neil Oz with their twin girls, who are 3, Emma and Julie. And they woke up Saturday morning to their red alert, which means rockets were being fired, missiles are being fired from Gaza into Israel. And so they swiftly went into their bomb shelter, which a bomb shelter is just a bedroom that is protected as a bomb shelter. At this point, the Hamas was terrorizing the kibbutz. And they began to hear them in the neighbor's house. And smoke started filling in their house because the terrorists were burning down homes. In a way, to smoke people out of their houses as well, like as if they were rodents. At this point, my cousin Sharon sent a voice note to her immediate family that brings me to my knees.
חברים, אני מצטערת, הם שורפים לנו את החדר מעבר, כל העשן נכנס לממ"ד. אנחנו כנראה לא נצא מזה. אנחנו אוהבים אתכם.
She said, we're probably not going to make it out of this. The smoke is filling, in the bomb shelter. We love you. And that was the last we heard from them. We, at this point, knew they were gone, and then eventually we saw a TikTok video. See David holding one of the twins, and could see Sharon holding from behind, really, what looks to be her niece Amelia.
When I see this, and how they murdered babies in their cribs, and then I hear Free Palestine.
Free Palestine!
They really want to help their people, they should revoke Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Israel has not been in the Gaza Strip since 2005. There's no occupation. There's absolutely no reason for none of this to happen. We just want that piece of land that we were there for over 2,000 years to be ours, and we're willing to share that with the Palestinians in peace. We want peace.
At this point, I was becoming very confused. On one hand, it says that the State of Israel was founded in 1948. Yet people at the event were telling me it's been their homeland for thousands of years. What the hell's going on? I figured I'd find a rabbi to help me answer that question.
So one thing I was really curious about is, what is the importance of Israel in the Jewish faith?
So my name is Rabbi Shlomi Levertov. I'm a Chabad rabbi. The first verse of the Torah speaks about the creation of the world, and God said, I created the world, and I decided that I want to give the land of Israel to the Jewish people. It was God's present to the Jewish people as a part of the chosen nation to be able to do our job as Jews, which is to be a moral light to the world.
And when did the Jewish people first arrive in Israel?
Abraham was in Israel. Jacob's famous dream of the ladder that happened in Israel.
So who was Abraham?
Abraham was the first person who recognized that the world had a God and a creator.
So Abraham was like the proto Jesus, OG of monotheism.
So he definitely is in that way.
Because Islam, Judaism, and Christianity are all defined as Abrahamic religions.
If you want to go into religion, every religion has to start with a revelation. For Christianity, it would be Jesus, and for Arabs, it would probably be Muhammad. And for the Jewish people, it was actually a revelation at Mount Sinai. There's not one person in Judaism who had that revelation. History tells us that the Jewish people, there were over 1 million people that.
I'm sorry, I gotta point this out. Did you see when they showed Jesus's picture?
I did. I was like, oh my gosh, the Christians in this country would be so pissed off about that. They were like, he didn't look like that.
No. They showed the thing is they showed Jesus's picture and then he said Muhammad, and then it showed just a black picture. It didn't show. I don't know if you noticed that, but yeah.
They did that on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. I had
100%.
I had to point out the editing. Very, very well done. Good stuff. By the way, this is Channel 5.
Well, but okay, so the argument here.
Anything.
Yeah, the I guess argument that he's addressing here is
a biblical one.
It's been our home for thousands of years. Well, it hasn't, because people don't live thousands of years. People live about 80 to 100 years, maybe. So yeah, it's not been your home; it's been your ancestral home, but it's also been Palestinians' ancestral home too. So that's the problem.
Yeah,
let's face it, Israel is a theocracy. Really, it's a theocratic state. It is a Jewish state. So
okay, well, why? But why do you say if politically it's ran as a democracy? Correct. I mean, they hold regular.
yeah,
elections.
they do, but they have don't they have a parliamentary system where
Let me just pull it up.
I think they have a parliamentary system. It's like the name of it is in my head somewhere, but it's getting late for me. But yeah, they do. But I'm just saying it is a religious state. It's a religious state. But see, that's what's brought the problem in here is that you can't just run around and create things based on your religious beliefs. You can't do it. And then they're talking about,
Parliamentary Republic is the name.
Yeah. Okay. So they have a parliamentary system. So they would have, I think, a president who represents them, kind of like the head of state, and then you have the prime minister who would be the head of government. But anyway, and that's the Netanyahu. I think he is a terrible, terrible leader. He needs to be removed. I think he's got his hands all up in this stuff.
He's been like, I mean, this is where I kind of like disagree. I do think that the voice, like the pressure is more there and it's more intense, but people have been, as far as the world goes, speaking out against Netanyahu for 3 years, at least that I'm aware of. You know what I mean? So I mean, when people
he's been able to build a coalition, a conservative, like hard right coalition.
Yeah, but before that, they were trying to get him
give him
out of
power.
They were trying to get him out of there, and then he did do that successfully. But I mean, as far as like on the world stage, when people are like, act as if people like generally just blindly align with Israel. I mean, don't be wrong. I think there's a little bit of that, just based off like how the alliances and stuff like that. But at the same time, people have been critical for sure. Like I said, maybe not from a government standpoint. That was the whole conversation earlier about kind of like circumventing our leaders, which are in a lot of ways tone deaf, and we have to work towards, I don't know, having better leadership.
No, that's hard. That is hard. But that just kind of goes to show you that the people are not their leadership, really, because a lot of these systems are, easily played with. But the games are not like consistent all over the world. They're not consistent even within countries.
Well, to be clear,
you can play this stupid game.
That's the smart thing that Russia did, where they played against that. And they're like, hey, let's just put propaganda in their country. The people are going to hate their government. We're going to play against that. Way smarter plan, honestly. Way smarter plan, because it is true. Like there is going to be some natural like discontent between, a government and their people. I mean, at least 9 times out of 10, anytime I've ever experienced it, there's been, some level of discontent. So this is just not a utopia. So playing against that, I think, is far more effective. Let me go ahead and I'll hit play if you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay, cool.
Had a revelation at the same time. And that was on our way to Israel, actually. Shortly after, they started the Davidic dynasty, and King David had control over Israel.
Oh, King David, y'all know what's going on.
And then King David's son, King Solomon, built the temples.
Shortly after, King Solomon's temple was destroyed, and the Jews were expelled by the Romans.
The Romans threw them out in 1st century BC.
Though a couple of them stayed in Israel, the far majority of Jews scattered around the world and would not return until 2 millenniums later, when the Zionist movement began in Eastern Europe.
Zionism is Jewish nationalism. What the Zionists did was they took a religious community and they made it into a national community. Right. Basically, this religious community had an affinity for Palestine, had been in Palestine in ancient times. And so the idea was the restoration of the community back to its ancestral land.
Israel runs deep in our blood. There's like a sense of belonging and feeling and connection, and it's just a part and parcel of the Jewish people. We pray 3 times a day. In our prayers, there's like 20 mentions in a day of returning to Israel, coming to Israel. Our hope was to always get there and get back there and be there. Throughout history, if you see Jews going to the gas chambers during the Holocaust, they were singing a song, Ani Mamin, I believe. And it was about belief that God will take us to the promised land. So true Zionism was this idea that Jews believe that God will bring us back to Israel.
Well, something else happened while the Jews were in exile.
Britain is God, and they brought them back. I mean, look, I think that this is tough, man. This is complicated because when you talk about like some ancient right to the land based off of a religious text. And that's why I honestly think like even going back to 1947 and who was there and stuff like that. That's why these things are fruitless kind of conversations to have. Last time we took land for the Palestinians and gave it to the Israelis. See how that went. That's going terribly. So it's like I feel like we really have to. I don't know. There has to be some solution where people are able to live together because they both obviously, are committed to having that to be.
Well, I mean, I don't see any problem with them living where they want. I mean, really, I don't have it, except for you can't just go like I can't go into a person's land that they currently own, and claim that you know what, my family's had ancestral ties to this land
but
for thousands of years. And a lot of Native Americans can claim that. Actually,
that's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. So the opposite, and think about it like
you
this.
You can't do it.
So the opposite end, think about it like this. If you have people that come in and they're like, hey, we're going to give this land now today in 2023, we're going to give Alabama to Native Americans. I mean, you're going to have that's going to be an issue. That is going to be a huge issue. People at this point, also feel like they have a claim to it, and even more a better claim, to be honest.
I mean, you remember like we went and visited this cave in Alabama. You remember that?
Yep.
Okay, so what if those people's ancestors?
The
cave people's ancestors.
They would have an even better claim. I'm saying Israel's claim is better than our claim to this land. At least Israel could say, like, in ancient times, we probably were here. But it's like the thing is that then you're asking.
I'm just saying that, and history goes on before that too.
Sure.
So it's like then you got the Israelite issue.
That's why it's frivolous. That's why it's frivolous.
Just continue to point out, well, I have this claim based on whatever. Every group can, every single group. With any power is the whole thing. So right now, Israel has the power. They just have the power. And so that's who gets the land. I mean, that's the rule in history. The one who has more power gets the territory.
Yeah, people that and honestly, people that want less government. This is something like you got to really worry about that if your government, if your government can be taken over by straight up warlords, which here we are. Here we are.
The advent of a religion called Islam, a religion which began in the year 610 with a man named Muhammad, who claimed to be the last line in a string of prophets that included Jesus and Abraham. Now, the third holiest site in the Islamic faith is called the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which sits directly in the heart of Jerusalem.
Al-Aqsa is a particular flashpoint.
It is apparently where the Prophet Muhammad said his final prayer before beginning his miraculous journey into the kingdom of heaven. Oh, and it was also built directly on top of Solomon's temple. The original Jewish temple the Romans burnt down 2,200 years ago.
An Israeli police raid on Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque has sparked fury among Palestinians and condemnation across the Arab world.
Yeah, this is some seriously ancient beef. Anyways, let's go back in time. For 600 years, the territory of Palestine was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. But then after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 1912,
the British got what's called a mandate for Palestine. In other words, they were supposed to supervise Palestine during the interwar period.
Then, for some reason, in 1917, the British passed something called the Balfour Declaration, which declared Palestine to be a national home for the Jewish people. At the time, less than 5% of Palestine was Jewish. But soon, that would completely change.
Jews began to arrive with the Zionist movement. Jewish immigration was something that, at first was an annoyance and then became a real problem. The problem is that it was impossible to, keep the two sides separate. So the British just threw up their hands at a certain point and said, okay, we're done. And that's when we see the conflict really beginning the way it is now. You have a mass nationalist movement beginning in Palestine. You have in Israel, the Zionist movement arming itself. And so therefore what we see is two groups that are vying for control over a single small area, actually, about the size of New Jersey.
So Israel declares statehood in 1948.
Israel declares statehood in 1948. This is after a brief civil war with the Palestinians, the indigenous inhabitants of Palestine.
6 million Jews were killed outright by the Nazis. Something had to be done. We went ahead and done it. We set up the Israeli government in Palestine, move some of the Arabs out.
About 720,000 of them were forced to flee
God.
for a variety of reasons, including terror,
God, how
including
you said
ethnic
that.
cleansing, including the fact that
Move the
it's
Arabs
a
out.
smart thing to do to leave a war zone. And
Oh,
you know, the
back your shit up
Palestinian
and leave.
question fell off the face of the earth, actually. Now, it was the Palestine Liberation Organization, starting in the late 1960s, that brought the Palestine issue back again. Maybe your audience remembers some of the terrorist acts that, you know, it was called television terrorism, where there would be hijacking of airplanes. In one case, they blew up these airplanes after television crews arrived, not with anybody on board. They'd cleaned them out first. But the idea was to make a spectacular series of raids that would keep the Palestine issue alive, and it worked. I mean, who talks about Kurdish nationalism now, but we all talk about Palestinian
I
nationalism.
think about them
Why is that?
when it comes to all
Well,
this.
because the Kurds weren't able to keep their question alive, you know, and the Palestinians were able to do that. And sometimes it took spectacular acts of terrorism. Sometimes they were bloody, sometimes they weren't. But, you know, in all cases, they kept the question alive, which is why I think what Hamas has done recently is the same thing, fits with the same pattern.
I got a question for you.
I think you have very good points. Yeah.
Do you think that violence is necessary in revolutions?
In revolution.
Do you think you could have like a peaceful? Do you think you could have a peaceful revolution?
I'm going to put myself off camera for just a sec, but I hear you, and I'm going to talk. Yeah. So is violence not necessary?
Okay.
No, I mean, yeah, no, it's not necessary.
Do you have an example of like a scenario where we've seen, you know, something you could classify as a revolution without there being violence attached to it?
Well, I'd have to think about that, but I think you can think of there's violence. I'm thinking of the labor movement, but there was violence involved in the labor movement, and there usually is. But the most recent one, you know, you could think of the strike stuff. I mean, those are revolutionary actions by lots of people together. So I'm saying it depends on what you define a revolution as. You know, it's like there are lots of small kind of wins for people when they bind together. You know, when they collectively act. There are lots of little wins. We may not consider those revolutions, but sometimes they're revolutionary, I think. You know, they change the order.
I think that's fair.
So,
that's kind of what I was thinking about. So I mean, you know, those are good examples, and I think that those are bigger than small wins, even as far as like
absolutely,
the gains that we've been able to make recently, as far as that goes. So, but I think that's an interesting thought, and I mean, I hear you on that. I'm just wondering, like, as far as like a government political revolution, you know, I wonder if that's possible without.
There have been like soft coups happen throughout history where you have military takeovers of governments. You know, now there's always the threat of violence, of course. You know,
that was
violence could be. You know, I guess
was that
we're talking about physical violence.
Well, no, I'm saying with Egypt, was that?
No, there was violence going on, but I remember watching that on TV, being pretty riveted by it. And you know, you have that one lady reporter that used to be with like 60 Minutes, and she turned into a complete wackadoo. You know, she was like, but I mean, I think she was victimized during that though, and raped, and which sounds absolutely traumatizing. Yeah, I don't remember her name, but she was like,
single stream we get on here, you're gonna do this?
What
the R word? Like, come on now. I'm just playing with you.
Oh no! I'm sorry. I need a little.
Funny that it just so happened to be yes, but
she was okay. She was essayed. Is that what they say online now? She was essayed, but you know she was. Complete like MAGA, you know, QAnon wackadoo.
Yeah, you gotta figure out her name. I gotta look into her before I get off the stream, because that's gonna have to bring it full circle. You said she was victimized while over there reporting on Egypt.
Yes. Yeah, and it really messed with her. But now she's like way off into the, you know.
Has she ever talked about this herself?
Oh, yeah. I'll have to look up her name. I can't remember her name right now.
That's craziness.
But it's fascinating. I'm just saying
that is crazy.
It is possible. I think in this just has a history of violence. You know, it's like their ability to communicate with each other like in any nonviolent way has completely eroded. And in all honesty, I think Israel's responsible for shutting down Palestinian ability to communicate in a rational, nonviolent way. So they've kind of forced them into, because they've shut them off. And and so there's no way for them to really truly flourish there. There's just not.
Yeah.
So it's like,
there
okay.
was a period where, like, when they supported Hamas and put them in control, like, there was obviously a relationship at that point, right? Like,
What are you talking about? When Israel supported
Hamas and they got rid of the PLO or whatever.
Oh yeah, you're saying, but those were backroom deals. You know what I mean?
No,
it's not
but
like they were saying to the Israeli public, "Oh yeah, we're going to be supporting."
No, I know not the public, but I'm saying at that point, leadership was in the room together. That's the opportunity. I mean, if you're trying to, live peacefully or find some kind of like move forward, I mean, I feel like that was kind of the opportunity. I agree. At this point, it's a wash, but I mean, like at that point, I think there was some kind of, they were having conversations, and I mean, Israel was supporting the people they were putting in control at that point. And that really confused me. But then when I've looked into that, I've seen that like Hamas was supposedly like making obviously some like kind of like public supposed like change of face or like promises that they obviously didn't really intend to follow through with or whatever. This is like the Israeli point of view, but I don't know. So I mean, I think at that point you have some kind of opportunity, and at this point it's a wash. But there was historically, we have had periods where they've come to certain agreements and attempted. I mean, there's been several attempts to kind of like find some kind of agreement that I think both sides have turned down. And I mean, in a lot of what I read has been like Palestine hasn't been happy with the basically terms of what they would be agreeing to with Israel. So how much of that is in good faith, I don't know, but we'd have to get really into the details with that. But we can get back into it.
Keep the question alive. Make sure there's no compromise.
I do want to mention one thing. Sorry, before we continue, I just want to mention one thing is that it's a little weird to sit down and talk about the history of Israel when barbarians come and literally slaughter Jewish children, Jewish mothers, Jewish fathers, Jewish grandparents, and literally just slaughter them. It's not a time to like look at the history, who's right, who's wrong. And let's say for whatever reason, they had a claim or had something or whatever it is, that doesn't ever allow for what happened on Saturday or Sunday.
6:30 a.m. Saturday morning, and they came in and slaughtered, only from the Peace Festival, more than 260 people.
That was their crime, going to a music festival in the woods. And Hamas came in after they threw in those hand grenades, and they sprayed machine gun fire on all these young, happy, beautiful people who were just there to have a good time, listening to music in the woods.
And then I hear Free Palestine.
You're killing each other. So don't talk about
At some point during this rally, I realized that almost nobody in attendance was quite sure exactly what the Palestinians want. For many of them, it was simply the murder of all Jews.
They're interested in getting rid of Israel and all the Jews around the world.
And most of the people who are at those rallies are people who actually believe in the destruction of every Jewish person. It's not that they don't want us to have the land of Israel. They don't want us to have any land. They want us in the ocean.
Or to establish a global caliphate like ISIS wanted to.
They want to have caliphates in the entire world, so it's coming our way.
It all reminded me of America after 9/11. I was obviously 3 years old, so I don't remember that much, but I do remember asking, why did this happen? I was always given the same answer. Al-Qaeda hates us because we're free.
Osama bin Laden is just representative of networks of people who absolutely have made their cause to defeat the freedoms that we take, that we understand.
However, it's these sort of oversimplifications that serve to obscure the true reasoning behind many of these international conflicts.
I forgot how much he was something else.
The day before I attended the pro-Israel rally, I attended a Free Palestine rally and was able to get more clarity on what Palestinians mean when they say Free Palestine. At the rally, I learned about the blockade.
This might be what we're about to watch, so we'll have to keep an eye out for that. We don't want to rewatch this stuff, but let's go ahead and keep going.
For 16 years, the Israeli government has suffocated Palestinians in
Mike,
Gaza
get another mic.
under a draconian air, sea, and land military blockade, imprisoning and starving over 2 million people and denying them medical aid.
Gaza's been under blockade for 16 years. No one can leave.
They've been denied the basic human rights of just living a life along with having food, water, fuel, electricity.
And that's what we're focusing on here today.
Like I said, 16 years of siege, 16 years of being held hostage in an open-air prison.
I also learned about the intense travel blockade and sundown laws Israel has placed on Gazans.
If you're living in Gaza, are you allowed to travel freely throughout Israel?
No.
Can you just go for like the weekend?
No, it's not a free movement to travelers. So in order to be able to cross from one to another, you have to go through checkpoints. And Palestinians have to be back in the territories at nightfall.
And that curfew is imposed by Israel?
By Israel.
I think that a lot of people, when they say, free Palestine, a lot of them are referring to the economic sanctions and the inability for people to travel out of Gaza. What do you think about that being lifted?
Yeah, so, the Gazan border was open on a daily basis into Israel. So people of Gaza were allowed to go into Israel. They would earn money in Israel. They would work there. On the contrary, the Gazan border into Egypt has been closed for years.
Right.
Ask yourself why.
Why?
That lady is showing so much like she's going in, but you could tell she wants to,
Yeah, she's done. But but she could talk about that, but she's diverting the issue. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So Egypt is another country. And so, but Egypt did not push Palestinians off of their land.
Yeah, but
her government did. So it's like in Egypt is literally, look, they've sailed off the border. That's a whole separate issue. We can debate whether that's right or not, or whether they should accept all the Gaza,
but she didn't
the Palestinians.
She didn't mention that. But I understand what you're saying.
She said the border between Egypt and Gaza is closed as well.
No, I don't think that's. Maybe she said that and I missed that. But what I heard. Okay, but what I heard was that Israelis, I thought. She said that they can't go through Gaza or whatever is what I thought she was saying.
No, she was talking about the border between Gaza and Egypt. And she's insinuating that, well, they closed the border, so why shouldn't we around the other two sides or three sides or whatever it is? So it's like, at the bottom, well, no, it'd be the other two sides.
Well, when do you think when should they be able to close their border? That's a question to ask them.
Well, but the issue is different. She's equating two things.
Well, okay, I understand.
Not the same,
But hold on. I understand, but I'm asking you a separate question then, which is related to this. So then, should they just have open borders to the Palestinians that live in Gaza forever? At some point, do they get to be selective, like most countries get to be? Have some kind of process to enter it. There's also like checkpoints, if you want to call them. If we want to go to Canada, for example, so it's like. Yeah, I don't know. That's my question for you.
No, I understand that, but what she said, but the problem is different than she's not even recognizing the problem. That's the whole issue here. Is I don't like I said, the more I learn about it, the less it gets.
Okay, but then let's recognize
why this is happening. Recognize that this man's telling you.
Okay, so but I'm saying like.
You can't say
I'm asking the question.
It's not equal.
I think a question to ask those people, he wasn't asking the Palestinians questions. A great question, I think, would be to ask them, like, okay, at what point do they get to put some parameter, a checkpoint or whatever? If it should just be free movement, because they used to be on the land, does that ever change?
Yeah, it's a unique situation with the borders. It is because Palestinians lived in that land before. This current conflict. I'm saying they're being squeezed. And so they're not only just, militarizing their border, basically, but they're also restricting goods. And there's all kinds of tactics they're using here. They're not allowing them to use their water.
I think we have so there's several things to address there, I think, separately. But I mean, as far as like the movement in and out of the country based off of
by all ways,
based off of what just indefinitely, I don't know if I would agree with that. Like at some point, our country, for example, has militarized borders on both sides, and we're allies with both of our neighbors. It's just a matter of security and like the people that may be within the country. Even in this case, even more severe, you actually are at war with the governing body of that other land. So it's like, you know, I don't know. I think that's a complicated issue. I think that's something, you know, definitely a complicated issue. We keep going. I want to get through this before devices die.
Well, that's a question for the Israelis, actually. The Israelis think that, you know, the Palestinians are dangerous. There was a second uprising that took place in 2000 against
Just going to rewind it a little bit. So
Egypt has been closed.
For the Israelis, actually. The Israelis.
Come on.
Right.
Ask yourself why.
Why?
Ask yourself why.
That's a question for the Israelis, actually.
Yeah.
The Israelis think that, you know, the Palestinians are dangerous. There was a second uprising that took place in 2000 against Israeli occupation, and it was extraordinarily bloody. It was extraordinarily bloody. And there were things like suicide bombings, bus bombings, Palestinian militants walking into restaurants and killing people. I mean,
I remember when all that stuff happened.
Like, we're used to terror attacks. Growing up in Jerusalem, we had buses explode, we had people stab people, and our whole life has been around this conflict.
In a way, Israeli society has never recovered from that. The peace process has never recovered from that.
Just from the trauma of, you know, these terror attacks.
Right, by what took place during what was called the Second Intifada.
And then right now, the Gazan border was opened up forcefully by Hamas. And we all saw what happened. So again, the experiment has been done. We're not willing to do additional experiments. I think if you had any doubt that this needs to continue, we need to open up our borders and support, you know, the Gazans. We've tried to do that as a sovereign country that wants peace. At this present time, would you even think this is something that should be done? Would you even think that this should be our responsibility?
You see that with the terrorists that were killed in Israel, they were able to go through their stuff, and you see some of them had literally licenses to work in Israel. These are people who you might have actually smiled at them in the store. You might have thanked them. You might have even given them a tip for their hard work, and you thought that they were so appreciative of what you did for them. And then a day later, they came and killed your family.
But at this point, I don't think Israel is in a position to even do any more of that. We really have to defend ourselves.
They don't care about Americans either. I would say that most of the people who are parading with them, they wouldn't last a day in Gaza.
I think it's really interesting to be pro-feminism, to be Black Lives Matter, to be march with Ukraine, and to march for gay rights and trans rights, and realize that like not a lot of us would have those rights in Gaza. And that's not because of Gaza. It's not because of the great Palestinian people that make that place. It's because of Hamas. The Hamas is a terrorist organization that runs that. Palestinian people didn't do it. Hamas did, and they've radicalized their whole spot.
I feel like anybody who's marching and saying it's only because of humanitarian or whatever, are they marching today for the 200 plus hostages that are stuck in Gaza? Who knows what's happening? Who knows if they're even alive now? Who knows what's happening? So I want you to march for those. Let's get those 200, and then let's talk about the people holding those 200.
I've read some things about hostages actually being killed by like Israeli strikes and stuff like that.
Right.
Just saying. So
right. Yeah, I'd like to know who is trying to get these hostages back. I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah.
From our government, from the Israeli government.
Put the guy
what are you doing?
Put the guy that got Brittany Griner back on the job.
Right. No, that's right. Yeah. I mean, they should be absolutely. And they say, I don't know if there's Americans. I'd have to look, but I think there is.
Oh, yeah, there was. I mean, I think
they need to. But the solution is not to bomb the Americans dead that are hostages. You know,
exactly.
So the goal is to save them.
That's
if you think they're alive, then they should. We should have. But it's like, where's SEAL Team 6, you know, or 7, or whatever that was that went in for Osama bin Laden? You know, where are they?
I'm sure.
I mean, there is the ability. The whole point is there is the ability to do strategic strikes, but they don't want to. They don't want to. They just are angry and vicious. And that woman was full of vengeance.
Well,
She
hold on.
was.
I wonder
I'm not
why.
blaming
Okay,
her for it.
I wonder why that is, though. That they don't want to do these like specific like strikes specifically. You know what I mean? Like I'm saying,
Right.
like for
We've
example,
done
I
them.
guess I understand you don't want to lose anybody, and like if that's I guess that's the only thing I can think of. Like if I'm trying to be rational at all, you don't want to lose anybody on your side. By bombing, you're not doing that. You're
So
just
you decide to kill,
a ton of people. Yeah,
thousands of people.
yeah, yeah.
Thousands
No,
of
I
people.
understand that. I understand that.
I
but
mean, that is absolute. It's
could you think of
barbaric.
another reason that would make sense other than that? I guess another reason that would make sense. This is if I'm being less charitable, would be because if you like completely decimate the land or whatever, you might have some opportunity to then take that land and expand further into it because you make it unlivable.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. So I honestly
Unacceptable.
don't know, but I'm kind of thinking about that whether because you're right. There's like special forces and things like that. Why don't they, send those people in? But I mean, I understand also not wanting to risk any of their lives. You know what I mean? But you are dehumanizing the people on the other end to not value their life in some respect, even if you don't do it equally. There's just thousands of civilians that are dying. So let's get
Friday
into
the 13th, I woke up to the news that the IDF had contacted my family in Israel to inform them that my family is indeed in Gaza and alive. We have not one shred of information about their conditions in Gaza.
Is there any sort of negotiation going on? Like, is there terms that that Hamas is providing for the release of hostages?
I've heard that they want something like 6,000 prisoners to be released, Hamas prisoners specifically, which mind you are terrorists. Gilad Shalit, do you know who he was?
Not familiar.
Gilad Shalit was a soldier that Hamas kidnapped. They've done this many times, but it's never been at this volume of people. And it took the Israeli government 5.5 years to negotiate with Hamas to get him back. And that was typically what they wanted in the past is prisoner release.
How close is the kibbutz to Gaza?
I don't know in proximity, but extremely close.
Very
close to the Gaza border. Like, so much so that this has always been a concern. In their kibbutz, right, in their area, the children's playgrounds are secured for potential rocket attacks.
So, most of your life you've kind of been aware of this tension going on the border between Gaza and Israel?
Yes, all my life. Well, let's be real. Hold on. Gaza, the way it is now, is not since 2005.
Do you feel like the closing of the border in 2005 kind of led to escalating tensions?
I don't want to talk about the politics of it right now.
Now she does it.
I'm grieving, right? Like, I have a very opinionated voice. You might hear that, but I'm a person who loves my family, who lives for my family, and that's all I'm thinking about right now. Yes, there is a time and place for us to have these discussions, but we've been having these discussions for how many years, and where has it gotten us? Nowhere. So maybe what we've done before isn't working, and we should do something differently now.
Channel 5 live worldwide, Hollywood and Vine. Fuck the authority, Channel 5 News. Channel 55. We don't fuck with customers. And 5 is the best number.
All right, nice.
What's up, guys? Thanks so much for watching this video. If you've made it to this point.
All right, buddy. No
Well,
disrespect.
good for him for doing that. I mean, that was
No,
pretty
that was good.
interesting. It was really interesting, but it's like, you could say, oh, I don't want to get into the politics. Well, the politics has caused all this.
Yeah.
It's caused all this.
No, yeah, I understand. I think I understand
I feel
where
for the victims, though. I mean, who doesn't, though? That's such a
and I think I
ridiculous
understand
question, kind of.
I understand where the
No.
line gets drawn, though, there, where it's like, this is kind of outside of politics. This is, we've talked about it 100 times, but it's like, yeah, this is civilians being attacked and murdered and massacred. So it does kind of step out of the realm of politics as usual.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, I understand why there's that response. And you have to understand the people that are being attacked or directly impacted by the attack, like family being kidnapped, like they're going to have a heightened view of this, especially in the short term. Like, I mean, expect them to have the most reasoned position, I think, is probably, asking a lot at this point anyways. So yeah, I don't know. I think at this point we would love to see some kind of ceasefire, obviously, where people are not being killed on the daily in the hundreds. I think that's, of course, what you would hope that everybody on each side would want to move towards. There's some kind of discussion. I just don't know. I think for me, it's kind of naive to assume that is the case. So, I think we'll just have to wait and see. We do have this Palestinian.
Let's do it.
We'll watch this real quick. This is a little bit shorter, and I think we did see like sneak previews of some of it that he put in there. So we'll see how much of it is a repeat, but we'll get this point of view, and then we'll go from there.
Hatred and prejudice and racism towards Jewish people and their faith and their ethnicity. Anti-Zionism is a movement fighting against the occupation. This is a settler colonial fascist regime that we're seeing attempting to wipe out an entire indigenous civilian population.
In your perspective, what is Zionism?
75 years of brutal occupation, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and colonization of the Palestinian people.
Right on.
Nice. Good point.
Israel is a Zionist state, and I think that's what we really have to focus on today. Yeah, hello, my name is Staura. I'm part of the Palestinian youth movement, and we're here with the Palestinian and Arab youth in the diaspora, as well as our solidarity allies, demanding that the siege and end on Gaza, and for the blockade to be lifted where they have been under blockade for 16 years, where they've been denied the basic human rights of just living a life along with having food, water, fuel, electricity. And we're here also to talk about the 75 years of military occupation that Palestine has been under since 1948. People need to see the Palestinians for who they are, part of a revolutionary struggle for liberation.
We understand Zionism to be a form of white supremacy, and the people have a right to resist their occupiers by any means necessary.
What do you think about Hamas?
I will not. You're not asking the right questions. It's the wrong question. I think that we can't equate the colonizer with the colonized. We can't equate the occupier with the occupied. It implies that these are equal parties, and it's not equal parties.
So you feel like violence is a reaction to oppression?
Yes.
But they also have the moral right to defend themselves against their colonizers and their occupiers. And this is something that we really need to focus on as a media. And instead of painting Palestinians and dehumanizing them and demonizing them and putting all these anti-Arab and anti-Muslim tropes against them, which the West has been imposing to justify the ethnic cleansing that Israel has already done and will continue to do. So this is something that we need to focus on and see the Palestinians are there defending themselves as part of a revolutionary struggle for liberation.
We need our countries back. That's it.
Free Palestine. From the land, what is it? From the land to the sea, Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea, that's right. Yeah, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
Rockets were fired into Israel as gunmen infiltrated several border towns and bases.
They swarmed into Israel by land, sea, and even on paragliders. And then they went on a rampage, slaughtering civilians in the street.
It's a horrible situation, yeah. And it was the worst day in Jewish history in terms of deaths since the Holocaust. 1,300 people died.
And what can you tell us about what's going on?
Well, the rage goes all the way back. I mean, basically what we have is we have two nationalist movements that are vying for control over a piece of territory. Hamas is in charge of the Gaza Strip, which is in the south of Israel, on the coast. It was founded in 1987 during the first uprising against Israeli occupation. Hamas won elections actually in 2006 and then took over the Gaza Strip in 2007. Hamas's charter said that all of Palestine should be an Islamic state. On a core level, it believes that Palestine is a gift of God. It's a religious endowment, and that they really can't surrender any part of that religious endowment. For Jews, it was a place that has been remembered in Jewish prayer and Jewish history. The Jews actually had a kingdom there under David and Solomon, and were there until the Romans threw them out. And so the idea was the restoration of the community back to its ancestral land. And so therefore what we see is two groups that are vying for control over a single small area, actually, about the size of New Jersey. The thing about Gaza, which your audience should know, is that Gaza is a extraordinarily crowded, one of the most crowded places on earth, extraordinarily poor society, in which about half the population is under the age of 18. So any Israeli incursion into Gaza is going to be killing a lot of children.
If you're living in Gaza, are you allowed to travel freely throughout Israel?
No.
Can you just go for like the weekend?
No. No. You can't
We
go
saw
too
this, didn't we?
Yeah, we saw this.
You're pretty
Some
much
of this.
isolated in Gaza.
Wait, so is there an airport?
No. Okay. So in order to be able to cross from one to another, you have to go through checkpoints. And it's not a free movement to travelers. One of my students, for example, was...
Yeah, some of this is for from the other video that we did with the Israel reaction. He kind of like...
Oh, I see.
Of the
So he
content.
kind of gave you background on the other videos, right? Or
Yeah,
on the issues through both sides.
a little
But,
bit.
I mean, if you look at it the second time, it's the same problem. You have an oppressed population, and the oppressor doesn't like it when they push back. So they squeeze them a little harder, and they keep doing that, in the effort to just, I guess, what do they expect them to be? Like animals? Like you train your animals? I mean, you cannot, they've treated look at this. I mean, that is ridiculous. To me, like I said, I need to study more on the 2 versus 1 state solution, but I almost think a 1 state solution is more just, because it's like, it is both of their lands. I mean, it is. In some way, they both have a claim to the lands, is what I'm saying.
But I think that one good issue, though, is, and he just touched on it, and please, I love this conversation, because when I splice this, I'm going to cut these 2 videos separate. So, let's definitely talk about it. I think that, whoever's going to be the representation of Hamas also has to be willing to compromise, though. There has to be some compromise on whatever that 2-state solution is going to look like. It's probably going to be a deal that, if it's a deal that makes sense, then neither side's going to be totally happy with. That's any deal, basically. So it's like, at least just going off of what we were just listening to that guy, the Professor James guy say, or the historian dude, where he said that there's basically a religious endowment that both of them feel to the land. That's so there's a religious conflict. So then there is no, he was speaking about Hamas specifically when he was speaking about that, as far as there's no room for compromise. And I think that's exactly, like I said, when we're dealing in a modern society where I think that your religious text that you subscribe to is fine and you should live based off that, but to enforce that upon me is just not something I can. I
don't know who has the right answer for it, but these people are being oppressed. They just are. And
that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. I mean, they're being oppressed, and Israel is the oppressor, and they refuse to acknowledge that they are oppressing an entire ethnic group. And that is apartheid. When you make them a lower status in the land.
Well, but they're not the same land. So is it technically?
But they push them off of their land. They steal their houses from them.
It's not the same. It's not the same. Israel doesn't govern Gaza, so it's like
but they do. They're governing from the outside, basically. They're preventing them
through having resources and leverage in that way.
Right.
But not literally.
Them in poverty.
But not literally. They're not literally the governing body of Hamas. So it's like, I don't know. I think that this is the issue, is that, and I think that it's interesting that you view it this way, is that you view Gaza and the shape that's in, you view Israel partially responsible for that, which I think is fair. I think that's where the disconnect is that Israelis are like, anything we do is like, you're welcome. You know what I mean? We let you come in. You know what I mean?
That is a supremacist.
So, but to say it's apartheid, though, to say apartheid is because technically it's not the same nation. They're like 2 separate countries, correct?
Well, not really. Not really.
Well,
Those are
not
the
really, but they are.
They're the territory. It depends on what political entity you ask.
Understand.
You know,
Well,
but some countries don't even recognize Israel anymore. You know, or they never did recognize Israel. That's why you hate countries like Iran. You know, our country does, because Israel is our ally. You know, I mean, give me a break. You know, no. We basically just shovel a lot of money over there because we have all kinds of probably financial interests. I'm sure there are financial interests somewhere here.
Also, they let us
something going on.
Also, they let us store missiles there.
Yes. Yeah. And we can be overlords to the Middle East and cause them lots of misery, you know, for years and years to come. So yes, I get that.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, you cannot expect, if they were in the same position, it would turn them into extremists. They're extremists now. The Israelis don't see themselves as extremists, and that's the problem, is that they're both extremists. I mean, you cannot. I've seen some videos, which I said I can't barely stand them, but where you have, I mean, Israeli soldiers, these IDF soldiers, they are like jackbooted thugs, man. Some of them are. I mean, they just are. They're kind of terrifying. They'd be terrifying to me.
I see some of them like on. I seen Pierce Morgan had a dude from the IDF, and
Oh my God,
basically like, hey, it is what it is. We told you to get out, so get out. And
it's just like what what is that? That is crazy.
No, you're right. There's a
disassociation.
There's a disassociation of them even being, humans. Dehumanized.
Right. Well, but they've turned them into, so they may see them as lesser, but they've made them lesser, through their oppression. So it's like, it's not like Arabic, they're talking about the Arabs. The Arabs. I understand there's some Arabs who live in Israel and they're Jews, some of them. I get that. But the whole point is, this is still a supremacist, white, mostly. You see their, the government. It's a regime. And so there's a racist component here.
But there's still a distinction to be made.
Vicious.
There's still
it is extreme.
But I think there is still a distinction made where you have one society which does, I think, like I said, I looked up these numbers earlier. It was like 20% Arab. And then like the other thing that I cited, as far as like 80% or 86% of them said that they would not prefer to live in the Gaza territory.
Well, yeah, because it's a piece of crap now. Because they can't get necessary. Well, but you know what I mean? Because they have been oppressed.
Because the situation, not necessarily because Israel is like great or that they're treated fairly, but just because Gaza has been, so disenfranchised by, Israel. Or, I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, but I just think like separating some of the responsibility, if not, I'm saying the people, but I think there is an acknowledgement of the, basically, like we said earlier, the terrorist organization that happens to be the government of this land. So it's like to completely remove that and remove responsibility there entirely.
I'm not. And I think that's idiotic too. So because our news media thinks we're all so stupid. They only have to, they toe one line, and there's this consistent message, And the fact of the matter is, neither side has done. They both caused harm, a tremendous harm, and trauma, and misery, and pain. That is war, though. Yeah. That is war, and I think it's kind of useful for us to see this occasionally. But I mean, I can't do it because it just makes me really emotional. I'm aware that war is vicious and terrible. So we can say, oh well, the Palestinian murder, or the Hamas murder of all these innocent civilians and was terrible. Of course it was. It was terrible. Yeah. It was a terrorist act.
And the last time something like that happened the other way? I'm not aware. I mean, I've read of some horrible things that Israelis had done in like the 90s and like the 80s, but something in like 2000. I just haven't heard.
It just goes on and on and on.
Well, I mean, I've heard of like I said, like people being displaced and stuff like that. But like I said, we're talking about something different. That's why I think that the distinction isn't useless to be made. You're not talking about people being displaced or something like that. You're not talking about even an attack on a military base, which some of that did happen. And I haven't heard anybody.
It did. Yeah.
But,
I mean, I looked into it, but they're only showing you the most extreme part of this entire attack.
Oh, that is the point, though.
Yeah.
Nobody's even mentioning that because that is kind of like expected. Right. That kind of is normal.
Right.
To report on that would be, So, I mean, the point being is that as a global community, I think there's a distinction to be made. If this attack would have been on military bases and that was it, I'm sure it would have been a story. But honestly, I think the reporting would have been the exact opposite. I think probably you would have had the same kind of momentum that would have came out as far as pro-Palestine momentum with very little pushback, honestly. Like even for, I would be curious how Israelis would have reacted in that case. But when you're talking about people that come through and rape and kill and kidnap people, civilians, it's like, yeah, that is different. There's a distinction to be made. That's fair.
But the last video that we watched, where you had the woman who was suspiciously calm talking about a bunch of kidnapped family members, you know, so you had her, and she was talking about, she was talking about they want the 6,000 Hamas soldiers out of jail.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know, are those all Hamas soldiers? You know, do they have just Hamas soldiers in jail? Do you really think that the justice system is fair to a Palestinian that has been through their process in Israel? I doubt it. I don't know a lot about it, but I'd be willing to bet it's not, you know. And if you're a young guy and you did anything that any young guy would do, you know, whether it could be dumb, because, you know, young people do dumb stuff everywhere in the whole world, you know. So it's like, okay.
Yeah, you realize how put
him in jail as a Hamas soldier, you know?
But this is my thing. I feel like when you're coming to the table like that, if I'm reading through the BS, then I think what they said is like there's 100 kidnapped or something like that, right? 100 kidnapped. It might have been 20. I don't know. Either way, I think the number was 100. So if we're negotiating for 100,
no, you were like 220 or something like that.
Okay,
right?
Fine. Let's say there were 500. It doesn't even matter. So okay, let's say 220. I know it's somewhere around there. So I'm negotiating to you, coming to you after you attacked the land. You came and you attacked, raped and pillaged, whatever. And I'm coming to you. I'm saying, hey, I want the 200 people that you kidnapped back. And then you come to me and you want 6,000 people. Does that seem like you're negotiating?
But didn't they do that before? I think there was something before where they traded that soldier they told you about.
Yeah,
they showed you earlier.
Yeah,
for a ton of like Hamas soldiers.
I think things like that.
There was a trade.
Things like that are apparent, though, in my opinion, that you're not really coming to me, and you're not like the fact that they did that in that case doesn't make me believe that they were arguing, the other side was arguing in good faith. Just for whatever reason, they decided to make that deal after several years of this negotiation, according to what they said. So I think that in this case, I think that is a important thing to note, as far as like what I said, the attack on civilians, and then also the attack when you're now coming to the table. This seems like you're negotiating with a power that is doesn't have the interest of finding peace. So the people that are the government that's in the oppressed spot, this is what is actually the most scary part to me, is that they don't seem like they're interested or concerned about the casualties on their side or coming to an actual peace agreement. I'm not seeing that from the other end. I'm seeing like fight viciously, really, when you're seeing like people speak out from the other end as far as officials go. So we're really on both sides, to be fair. So I don't know, like the people involved, I don't see them being interested in some kind of like ceasefire or come to peace. So I think that's what's most concerning. It seems like, honestly, the Hamas and Israel as well, but Hamas, or they're willing to have the entire Gaza obliterated just to be martyred, to become martyrs. And I think, honestly, if we want to go any deeper, that's part of the issue with Islam, to be honest, is this kind of like deification of like dying on principle type deal. So it's like, but either way, I don't know. We can get back.
I mean, but there are Islamic countries all over the world. I mean, we have lots of Muslim people who are American.
Yeah, but we're dealing.
It can work.
This is a radical group. We're not talking. This is just like if we were talking about Christian nationalist. I wouldn't necessarily compare that to like how most people apply being Christian. But I will say that like if this is a group that is Muslim, and this is we've had this situation in the past where there's these extreme groups that are willing to die based off of just principle and belief, and like I said, martyrism. And I think that's something to be really concerned about because I mean, like I said, I don't know that the people that are coming to the table to try to find peace on either side, and I'm saying this is what my main point is, the side that's in danger, and I'm agreeing with you, Palestine right now. I don't know that the leaders really want peace. whatever Iran is willing to give the people in charge as far as money goes to sacrifice their people, they may be totally happy to do that, to then cause some kind of like global war, global outrage. You know, you see how Western civilization also has reacted to this, and it's been very divisive for our just from like a cultural standpoint. So I think that that's very good. That plays in those countries like Iran's hands. And if you have like this society where a super small portion of the society, you know, can benefit, and we kind of are running into this now as Americans, and they're able to then leverage all these people that have no say, who will die in silence if it's not for, you know, what we're seeing as far as like stuff on Twitter and stuff like that, really coming out of Gaza. So let's get into the rest of the video.
A Palestinian from Gaza, and Palestinians have to be back in the territories at nightfall. They can't stay in Israel proper. So he had to actually camp out in the West Bank to go to university in the West Bank, in spite of the fact that his home was in Gaza, because he couldn't pass through Israel in order to go from one to the other.
And that curfew is imposed by Israel?
By Israel.
Why?
Well, that's a question for the Israelis, actually. The Israelis think that, you know, the Palestinians are dangerous. There was a second uprising that took place in 2000 against Israeli occupation, and it was extraordinarily bloody.
Do you have family in Palestine?
Yes, I do.
How are they doing?
We lost 14 relatives in the bombardment, and currently I haven't heard from relatives in about 12 hours. So
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
What's their life like out there?
There is no life.
Deadly retribution is raining down on Gaza. Israel says it's targeting Hamas with waves of airstrikes.
There is no life. This is why the people of Palestine have a right to resist. There is no life in Gaza. Israel has made it their mission to make sure that there is no life for the Gazans that are living in the Gaza Strip.
For 16 years, the Israeli government has suffocated Palestinians in Gaza under a draconian air, sea, and land military blockade, imprisoning and starving over 2 million people and denying them medical aid.
So I think when we're looking at a few days ago, I think it's really important to look at the history of Palestine and contextualize what's happening. A lot of people want to believe that this is a random moment that happened on October 7th. But realistically speaking, this is not true. This is a building upon a military occupation that has been happening for 75 plus years, and Gaza specifically for 16 years.
Gaza's been under blockade for 16 years. No one can leave.
They've been denied the basic human rights of just living a life, along with having food, water, fuel, electricity.
And that's what we're focusing on here today.
Like I said, 16 years of siege, 16 years of being held hostage in an open air prison where you have been denied everything, where your family has been killed, where you have to hold your dying child and bury them while you have to survive. Like, we have to look at the history of Gazans and people in Palestine.
You've had a series of wars. 1948 was the most important for our benefit. That was when the State of Israel was declared, Arab armies invaded, and about 720,000 Palestinians were forced to flee. In the wake of that, basically the Palestinians called 1948, the Israelis call it the War of Independence, Palestinians call it the Nakba, the disaster, you know. And ever since then, the issue of Palestine has been on and off the international agenda.
The politicians are calling for a second Nakba. If you don't know what Nakba is, it means catastrophe. It's what happened in 1948 when almost 1 million people were displaced practically overnight, and genocide and massacres of over 250 Palestinian villages. And we're seeing politicians, not just from the Israeli side, but also the US and other European politicians calling for the leveling of Gaza, calling for a complete annihilation of the Palestinian people.
Do you think the majority of people in Gaza are against Hamas?
I would say that that's not important. I think what's important here is condemning the violence and the blockade.
Because I'm Jewish, right, and I'm Israeli, so I'm very interested, and I have friends that are Palestinian, but somewhere in West Bank, only 1 or 2 friends from Gaza. But a big concern for us, I would say, is that people have no choice. Like, if you wanted to speak out against Hamas, would it be essentially safe for all your family members still living there?
don't think you're asking the right questions.
I'm just saying it's a true question because not a lot of us would have those rights in Gaza. And that's not because of Gaza. It's not because of the great Palestinian people that make that place. It's because of Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization that runs that. Palestinian people didn't do it. Hamas did, and they've radicalized their whole spot. And now the time has come that there's a second Holocaust. 1,300 plus people were killed. That would be equal to over 35,000 Americans, if that was in America per capita. Could you just say that is fucking horrible?
Where was the international outcry when Israel killed more than 200 Palestinians before the recent events in 2023? Do that. I'm here to speak on behalf of my people. So with that, I'm going to leave.
I mean, if the Sinaloa cartel sliced up everyone in Texas and New Mexico, what do you think America would do? Based on what you know America
Here
to
we
be
go
today.
with that guy
Plus, it's
again.
not just
Yeah.
Jews, Arabs, Palestinian Arabs, people from Thailand, Italy, Germany, a whole music festival. Do you go to music festivals? You're watching this channel. Do you go to music festivals? People from the music festival contacted me and said, share my story. I was there watching people get slaughtered. The same people that play at Coachella, the same people play at Lollapalooza. And this is a music festival. So to regurgitate settler-colonialists, how many Jews are white? Brown Jews, black Jews, white Jews. We're not white here, we're not white there. Too much of this world being negative. I'm like,
What is he talking about? I mean, no way.
Hamas terrorists. They're like, I don't know what you wanna. I'm from Argentina. What's the favorite place of vacation? The Bahamas. I'll turn them into hummus. Dills on the microphone, cook up what you looking. They got Mia Khalifa, Roger Waters, out of order. They'll sue you with everything. Don't test the Jewish lawyers. I'm talking like here. We exposed back from Gush Katif. I'm trying to have people live safe, not in bomb shelters of Tel Aviv. I'm talking down to the place when y'all looking for deals on the microphone, avenging the death of every child in a kibbutz.
See, now the police are even like, you know, that's enough.
Because I don't need protection from anybody or police officers. I'm rapping for my people. The flow is my seat up, and I don't need to rap for other people. Not a good idea. When I'm rocking in the zone, I'm not saying it's racist, but ironically, we're here in front of the Israeli embassy. Shabbat shalom.
Channel 5 Live Worldwide.
Shabbat shalom. I love it. He actually picked it up at the end. I like
Look,
it.
man, I mean, it's a very sad situation. It really is. It's very sad. But I just think it's a good old reminder that there is an oppressor and there is an oppressed. And plain and simple. And we as Americans should be again supporting the vicious killing, the indiscriminate killing going on. It is bloodthirsty. It doesn't make Israel look good at all. It's probably not effective other than eliminating the group and making them so weak to where they can live in abject misery in their little, So I'm just saying, look, I am for the United States cutting off all funding to Israel until they can behave.
But it's nice and simple.
Until they can behave. And if they can't behave, then we don't give them any money. I mean, that's just how I feel. You can't do this. You saw that bombing was horrible.
Yeah.
We could talk about how vicious it is. Yes, this one-on-one stuff where they walk into houses, but let's face it, those villages were pretty close to the border, very close, where you can see Gaza.
That doesn't matter, in my opinion.
No, I'm not saying they deserve to be killed because
I'm not saying you're saying that, but I don't even think it matters.
There's a reason they settled so close. It's the same reason they did that in the West Bank, where they just, they kind of squeeze themselves in there, because they're trying to pin. It's like a slow war. It's a slow land siege is what it is. And so, you just continue getting closer and continue getting closer.
Is there any ability? So at what point, what ability does Palestine have to create any kind of infrastructure on their own? Because a lot of the grief that I heard from people saying from a more modern standpoint was that like you said, the trade and what else were they talking about? Oh, the water, electricity, having control of. At what point are they able to build an infrastructure, or are they expected to have some kind of infrastructure of their own? Because that would alleviate the why are we relying on somebody that we feel like is directly oppressing us, right? So
right, but no, they built an infrastructure. You saw it. You saw all these buildings.
Well, the buildings
they were bombing. That's an infrastructure. You saw roads. They have hospitals. They have.
Well, we don't know how much of that existed already before ahead of time. Anyways, I mean, Gaza.
What do you mean? Gaza even being there?
No, I'm saying, but like Gaza, it was a place that existed that had things there. It was just disputed over. So it's like, I'm just saying, to say that they built an infrastructure. I mean, I don't know how. That's my question. I mean, they're not self-reliant even. I mean, to say that, oh, there was buildings there, that doesn't we can't say for sure that, you know, they built the building.
We got to get into the structure of, you know, even I guess. Well, you got to then get into the structure of how does their government, how do they govern themselves on that territory? I don't know, but I would assume that there are businesses there. There are businesses in Gaza. There are industries in Gaza, and I'm sure they tax their, you know, citizens and whatever they generate. But I would imagine, because they're so restricted. I mean, they're restricted from the water. They're restricted from all sides. So how are they supposed to transport goods and take part in commerce like every other country does? I mean, somehow Europe manages to move goods from one country to another pretty efficiently. And they do it all the time, every single day.
Well, it's a
but you can't oppress people to do that.
And also, it seems like it's a little bit of a landlocked issue. So, like, literally location. So, if
there are plenty of landlocked countries. You know what I mean?
Well, but what I'm saying is, if you have not a great relationship and not the means maybe to rely solely on, like, you know, sending things through like airplanes and stuff like that. Which I mean, who could do?
Evidently, they don't have an airport in Gaza.
Okay, so yeah, so I mean,
they're not even you know. So let's just bomb all this stuff to where it's literally uninhabitable, like you said. That's what they want. Hold on a minute, because this I was gonna say, well, the cat was about to knock something down, but she stopped anyway. But no, I'm just saying, when you've done that and you've restricted it to a point where you literally cannot move, what do you expect them to do? The way they have stayed, I think the Kurd situation that he used was a good example of, you know, Israel is kind of fed into this. No, you don't want to do that. Israel's kind of fed into this, and it's caused them, you know, and they've been kind of PR-wise, I'm talking about Hamas, they've been PR-wise pretty successful, it sounds like, by carrying out these terrorist attacks. They've gotten attention. And I remember when there were suicide bombs and stuff that went off all the time in Israel.
That's why I think that's
growing up.
I think that's why it's important to draw the distinction. Not that I don't think we should be talking about the Palestinian plight, but I think when people get upset about that, right, like, to be the response, I think honestly I empathize with that, or sympathize with that, and I think and I understand that frustration a little bit, in that this is something different. These aren't people that attacked in a military fashion. You know, if it was that's why when we spoke about earlier, the if this would have been a scenario where they didn't attack on a military base, and then the response would have been, look at these people and the situation they've been in, that would have been a much more reasonable conversation to have. But you know, the conduit that we use to hop into this conversation is just bad juju all around it, to reference your name while you're coming in here.
It stinks. It stinks to the high heaven.
Yeah, and also, I mean, like, I don't think that I don't want to encourage other groups of people that feel like they've been disenfranchised to feel like this is the only way to have their voice heard. Like, you know, that's a
but it's worked, you see.
That's my point.
And I mean, people have forgotten that the Kurds are people without a land too. I mean, you know, they really are. So it's like, and they're just kind of, that's a whole other story. But the fact of the matter is, they haven't acted like savages, you know, because both sides have done this. Both sides have done the savage stuff. So, you know, it's like they haven't, but it works. So you might as well continue doing it. And I can imagine it's kind of like, you know, it's like all kinds of different countries, but I'm thinking of Russia, you know, where Russia, you're constantly hearing kind of this, you know, the people want to be proud of Russia. You know what I mean? And we want to be proud of America. And so, you know, proud to be an American, that type of thing. Other countries have that too, you know, but you can get to the point where you're so nationalist, you're this, you know, religious, ethno-nationalist type regime that Israel has. Well, you know, you're going to get pushback on that. You're going to get pushback on it. You know, Russia is one of those countries, though, where you see the people. I find them fascinating because it's like, they want their leader to be strong because they want to be strong. You know, they want to have some dignity. They want to be proud to say, I'm
strong is a tough word because I think like there's a specific kind of strength that we're kind of referencing when we're talking about Russia.
Well, I'm not saying I'm not putting a value judgment on it either. I'm not saying that's
well,
wrong.
no, my thing is
right.
my thing is I think most places
you got to be able to understand. And somebody I saw today, he made a good point. He was saying we've got to be able to separate the justification, whether it's justified or not, from the understanding of why that would happen. You know, from the analysis of why that would happen.
Gotcha.
So we can say, I understand why that would happen. Now, the judgment on is that justified or not, that's a different question. But see, people want to put that all together all the time. Like you're anti-Semitic if you're anti-Zionist or, you know, all the time. They want to, you know, conflate those two. Yeah, because then it's like, oh, you don't want to say that. You can get in trouble. Well,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah, and it does
that.
happen.
Yeah.
But you got to be able to separate those two judgments, is look at it, you know, and say, okay, whether it was justified is a separate question from understanding why it would happen and the understanding of why it would happen. You know what I mean? And I think both sides have stories to tell. You know, Israelis have stories to tell, so do Palestinians. But
of course,
I mean, yeah, I think that, but this is a genocide type thing that they're doing. I mean,
we're into
and I
it.
think we've agreed as a world generally that that's wrong to wipe out a complete ethnic group, period.
Yeah.
You know, or to have them at such numbers, they're so weak that it just kind of, you know, pushes them off into nowhere. They're in a diaspora like the Jewish diaspora. I mean, it's ridiculous. And I do think that the Jews have a right to probably live on their homeland. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to read more about it, to be honest, because I do question that. And I think if this is based totally on religion, I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah. I just think, though, at the end of the day, when you start to have that conversation, at what point do you stop? Most people can't even, they have no idea what their ancient ancestry is. Like there's ancient civilizations, like when we talk about like Italians or Spanish, like those are pretty new terms. And those are usually what we're attached to now as modern people. But there's ancient civilizations that those people come from and that got displaced and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But that's,
I like to hear what Black folks have to say about it.
Yeah.
Because I think they have a unique way of viewing, you know, being an oppressed people within kind of an oppressive territory, you know. And I think that they historically would have a better handle on it. So I listen to those sources and I try to read those sources because it's really hard to be in kind of the elite group, you know. And I'm not look, I think class is a big problem. I think class is a bigger problem probably than racism in our country. But over there it's different, you know, and we have to acknowledge it's different over there than where it is here. So like
yeah. Well, here,
I mean,
I think that's fair. I don't want to cut you off because you are cooking, but I don't want
Okay, you move on.
All right, I'm in here. I'm shutting it down. Sorry about that. The computer died. That's how hard I go for everybody. I just don't know when to stop until it makes me stop. Either YouTube's got to take your boy down or the equipment's got to go out, or else I'm just going to keep on going and bringing that fire. But yeah, make sure you subscribe, show some love. This was a great episode with Juju. It was awesome being able to break down all the different stuff. What the Jubilee videos that got taken down earlier, go check those out. I'll try to cut them up into small videos, and also with the Palestinian and the Israeli stuff, and being able to go over those videos. It was a lot of fun. So make sure you subscribe, show some love. Go find us over on Instagram, find us on TikTok, everything, Sit and Politic, and I'll see you there. See you next time. Appreciate you for tuning in. We're out.